Before we begin, consider this. Why would a fully grown adult ignore a brand new luxury SUV and instead stand frozen in front of a slightly faded 1995 Toyota Supra? Why would someone spend more restoring an old car than buying a newer, faster, objectively better one? And why does the sound of a 90s engine note hit some people like a forgotten memory returning to life? This isn't about cars, it's about identity. There is a man in his late 30s standing in a parking lot. 3 feet away from him sits a brand new luxury SUV. Polished, silent, perfect. He doesn't look at it. Instead, he's staring at a slightly oxidized 1995 Toyota Supra. His breathing slows. His jaw relaxes. For almost a full minute, he doesn't move. If you asked him what he's thinking, he would likely mention the engine, the lines, the sound, the mechanical purity. But that explanation is only the surface layer. The real answer lives somewhere deeper, somewhere around 1997, in the back seat of his father's car, rain streaking across the window, a cassette tape playing through cheap speakers, the world passing by in a blur that felt infinite. He isn't looking at a car, he's looking at a doorway back into himself. And this behavior is not rare. It happens quietly everywhere. Grown adults pausing mid-conversation when a 90s Honda Civic rolls past. People spending tens of thousands restoring vehicles that originally cost less than a modern laptop. Garages becoming sanctuaries. Weekends dissolving into engine bays. From the outside, it appears irrational, but it isn't, because the explanation does not live in logic. It lives in memory. More specifically, it lives inside something psychologists call the reminiscence bump. Research consistently shows that experiences between the ages of roughly 10 and 25 carry disproportionate emotional weight for the rest of our lives. Music, movies, smells, places, and yes, cars. The 1990s arrived at a uniquely powerful historical moment. The Cold War had ended. Western economies were expanding. There was a collective exhale across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. For a brief window, the future felt open, optimistic, unmapped. And into that cultural atmosphere came machines that didn't just function, they felt alive. The Toyota Supra, the Nissan Skyline GTR, the Mazda RX-7, the Honda NSX, the Dodge Viper. They weren't just products, they were emotional propositions. They represented speed without apology, design without corporate smoothing, mechanical presence without digital filtering. Millions of teenagers absorbed these machines during the most neurologically sensitive period of identity formation. But the cars alone didn't build the obsession, media amplified it. Gran Turismo launched in 1997 and taught kids about gear ratios and corner balance before they even had a driver's license. Initial D transformed mountain roads into mythology. Top Gear reframed car preference as personality identity. And then came The Fast and the Furious. Suddenly, cars weren't machines. They were loyalty, brotherhood, rebellion, belonging. Here's the critical psychological layer. The brain does not sharply distinguish between experienced and simulated emotion when intensity is present. A 14-year-old racing a digital Skyline at midnight for hundreds of hours is not just playing a game. He's building neural associations. Emotion wires memory. Repetition reinforces it. There's a phenomenon called the mere exposure effect. The more often we see something, the more we tend to prefer it. By 1999, teenagers in Manchester, Minneapolis, or Melbourne had seen specific 90s cars thousands of times across games, films, magazines, and bedroom posters. That repetition did not feel like conditioning. It felt like taste. It felt personal. But it was something deeper. It was identity formation. Fast forward 20 years. That teenager is now 35 or 40. He has responsibilities, deadlines, pressure, disposable income. And suddenly, the car that once lived on his bedroom wall becomes attainable. To outsiders, it looks like a financial decision. To him, it feels like excavation. Restoring a 1993 RX-7 is not about resale value. It's about recovering a version of himself that once felt possibility instead of obligation. The car becomes a neurological time machine, because memory is not just visual, it is sensory. The 90s existed at a precise technological threshold. Cars were mechanical enough to feel raw, but advanced enough to feel fast. You could hear the turbo spool, feel the clutch engage, sense road texture through hydraulic steering. Modern cars are safer, faster, more efficient, but many are engineered for isolation, sound insulation, electronic steering, digital mediation. When someone says 90s cars feel alive, they aren't romanticizing. They're describing a sensory profile that has largely disappeared. And when something meaningful disappears, the emotional response is often grief. Beneath nostalgia, there is grief. Grief for a slower cultural rhythm, for pre-algorithm identity, for physical community. 90s car culture had texture, magazines with weight, parking lot conversations lasting hours, car meets built through presence, not notifications. When someone restores a 90s car today, they're not just restoring metal, they're attempting to restore a quality of connection, a tangible world, a slower pace, a coherent self. This pattern is not new. In the 1980s, men who grew up in the 50s and 60s began obsessing over vintage muscle cars precisely when financial capacity aligned with emotional longing. The 90s resurgence follows the same psychological architecture. The car is not the cause, it is the trigger. So what is truly happening in that parking lot? The man staring at the Supra is not stuck in the past. He's checking continuity. He's checking whether the 14-year-old version of himself still exists beneath mortgages and muted group chats, whether the part of him that felt speed as possibility, that felt the future as open terrain rather than scheduled obligation, is still accessible. When the engine starts and the exhaust note vibrates through his chest, the sensation that rises is not nostalgia, it is recognition. Recognition that identity layers, it does not disappear. Recognition that parts of us wait patiently for reactivation. That is what 90s cars represent psychologically. Not horsepower, not even performance, but continuity of self. A bridge between who we were becoming and who we became. In a world that updates every year, that patches identity like software, that cycles trends monthly, the desire to hold on to something tactile and emotionally anchored is not irrational. It is stabilizing. The love of 90s cars is not about living in the past, it's about preserving narrative coherence. And narrative coherence is one of the deepest psychological needs we have. If you've ever felt your chest tighten when an old engine note passes by, if you've ever justified a car purchase that made no financial sense but felt deeply necessary, you are not being impulsive, you are responding to something neurologically real. So the real question isn't why people love 90s cars. The real question is, what part of themselves are they trying to stay connected to? And in a rapidly digitizing world, is that connection more valuable than we admit? Because sometimes, a car isn't transportation, it is memory with an ignition. And turning that key is less about movement and more about remembering who you are. If this made you see car culture differently, subscribe. Because every week we break down the hidden psychology behind the things people love but rarely understand. And I want to ask you something. When you hear a 90s engine note, do you feel hope or something closer to loss? Comment one word below. And if you know someone who's restoring a 90s car right now, send it to them. They might finally understand.